Hi there, Andrea. How are you? Sorry, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we've got you. How are you?
Good. About 5 minutes ago, I just downloaded the app off the Apple Store.
Right, coming on your phone, yeah?
No, for some reason it wouldn't let me do it on the phone.
Oh, okay.
That's all good.
Oh, that's okay. So we've got you now. That's the main thing.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah, well, thank you for...
Very Uber.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it.
No, not a problem.
So
it's great that we can do this.
Yeah. Exciting. So yeah, we're just going to wait for a few more people to come in and then...
Okay, I'll be back in a minute.
Okay.
Get a glass of water.
Well, yeah, thanks for coming in, everybody. I can see people are coming in and also commenting in the chat room. I just wanted to just get this started by just acknowledging that we are all coming through this Zoom meeting on Aboriginal land, and just want to pay respect to elders past, present and emerging through all the country throughout Australia. Just quickly before we continue, we've got our guest panelists today, being Andrea Mason, who's the Royal Commissioner for the Royal Commission into Disability, Preventing Violence and Neglect. We've also got Diana Palmer from Ideas Organisation and Antoinette Braybrook from Djirra, the Domestic Violence Advocacy Organisation. So obviously people are coming in and they're asking if they can be seen, and the answer to that question is no. And the reason being for that is we just want to give priority of the bandwidth to people that are sharing as guest panelists this afternoon. And so there's also going to be a video recording made available of these webinars up on the website. So that will also be made available. And I'll also be sending out around to everybody that's registered just a brief overview, bullet points of what was covered by each guest panelist. And so that way then you've got a point of reference back to what has been covered today. So without any further ado, I will hand over to our guest panelist, Andrea Mason. Andrea, thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity of participating in this discussion today. And well done to First Peoples Disability Network for setting up this forum. And I hope that I can continue to engage as we continue the work of this Disability Royal Commission into violence, abuse, neglect and exploitation of people with disability. I'd like to also acknowledge that I'm on the lands of the Central Islander people here in Alice Springs, and I pay respect to them and their continuing leadership here in Alice Springs, and really appreciate all the work that they do for everybody who makes Alice Springs their home. I'd like to just give some general opening remarks, and then I'll talk specifically about the engagement program that we've been doing at the Royal Commission for First Nations people. And we also have recently issued a statement of concern that was in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic. I'd also ask if I can have a time warning as well, because I might need that, Tori, from you. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks, Andrea.
I also want to know, am I actually coming across clearly in terms of a volume?
Yeah.
Do I need to increase that?
Oh, we can hear you clearly. Thanks, Andrea.
Okay. So as everyone would be aware, and please, if you'd like us to read the terms of reference, it's on the Disability Royal Commission website. But in the terms of reference, it clearly provides a statement that says that the particular circumstances of First Nations people with disability should be closely examined, particularly across different systems and settings in the Australian community, and how those settings and systems impact on First Nations people with disability in relation to violence, abuse, neglect and exploitation. And because of that particular emphasis in the terms of reference, my appointment as a Royal Commissioner really emphasises that we need a seat at the table, and we need to have a point of reference for our work at every level, including at the Commissioner level. I'm pleased to say that we have First Nations people working right across the Commission, and it's been a pleasure to work with everyone so far. And we have a significant number of First Nations people working in our engagement team. And since last year, myself and other commissioners and staff have been working with those Indigenous engagement officers, and we've been visiting Aboriginal communities and organisations. We have a schedule of meetings for this half of the year, and obviously we started to make some plans for the second half of the year. The COVID-19 pandemic has obviously put a hold on those community meetings that we've been doing publicly, including forums, private sessions. And so what we're doing at the moment is we've postponed those public meetings, including hearings, until we get advice through our leaders in health to say that we can start to transition to more contact. But in the meantime, we're continuing to set up engagement opportunities. Just want to say at the beginning of my remarks today that the First Nations Indigenous engagement staff are looking at that schedule, and they're continuing to make contact with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Victoria and Western Australia and South Australia. And we'll continue to do that, New South Wales, even while we're not physically having contact with people face to face. We will be having those meetings online, so we look forward to continuing that for the rest of the year, even though it's going to be a little bit of a different setting. We're also still encouraging First Nations people, their families and carers and advocates to put in submissions. We have a link on our website, Tell Your Story, and there's a submission form there. It's being revised. It's a bit more straightforward and a lot less bulky. And so we encourage anyone who has a story to tell about violence, abuse, neglect or exploitation in any setting, and you're a First Nations person, then we encourage people to put in submissions. So I think as an estimate, we've had over 800 submissions so far from people in the community. But we've only received around 27 specifically from First Nations people. So what that means for us is we need to really have direct contacts to answer questions that people might have about that process of doing submission. to explain what violence, abuse, neglect and exploitation means, what's the scope of this Royal Commission, so people can really understand if what they are experiencing, their lived experience, is exactly what we're wanting to hear from. I also want to say in relation to that process of communicating that we just before the pandemic was declared, we had a program of having public advertisements to promote the Royal Commission, and when that pandemic announcement was made, unfortunately we had to put a hold on that. But nonetheless, with the situation that we are all in and having to use technology in different ways, we're endeavouring to create more content, video content, so we can continue to not just communicate, we want to connect with the disability community and particularly First Nations people and their families. So we can continue to encourage people to tell their story to the Royal Commission. So I just want to pause there, Troy, to ask if there might be any questions that people may have about doing submissions, which can be in writing, but can also be done via audio as well as video. People can also do their submissions in their first language if they would like to, and we will arrange to have submissions translated. So we want it to be accessible to everyone, no matter where they live, and no matter where their lives are at the moment, of every age and background. So I'll just take a pause there, and if there are any questions that people might have about engagement, I'll be happy to answer those questions. Or would you like me to continue, Troy?
Yeah, I think if you could probably continue, Andrea. We're going to open up for questions later on in the webinar. Okay. So if you could probably continue, and if people maybe just in the chat probably put forward some questions as well, that'd be great. Thanks.
Yeah. So we've also recently published on our website an issues paper to do with emergency planning and response. And this was directly in relation to concerns that were being raised with the Commission and also within the disability sector about the lack of inclusion that people were feeling about all government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, particularly in relation to concerns facing barriers in accessing healthcare, in being able to continue to have access to personal equipment, vital medications and therapeutic services and so forth. And so there were a whole range of areas that there were concerns about. And so we issued a notice of concern back on the 26th of March. And then recently we've issued a issues paper on our website. And what we're encouraging people to do is to contact us at the Royal Commission and to provide us with feedback on how the government's response is impacting on people with disability, particularly First Nations people with disability, and to help us understand how that implementation process is impacting on people with disability. So obviously health, the area of health is important, the area of food security is important, the issues of education is important for children with disabilities and their families who want that education and learning experience to continue during this pandemic for children with disability. And we also understand the challenges of the social exclusion or isolation that is being talked about. And for our First Nations people, we know that social connection is so important. So as people with disabilities have particular supports where physical contact is so important, we understand that also is an area of high vulnerability. So we'd encourage people to look at the website and check out that new issues paper. And if people are able to provide us responses or to contact our call line to let us know what they're experiencing at this time. I think I'll leave that there, Troy.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for that, Andrea. I've just got a few questions in the chat. Andrea, that you could possibly answer. And this question is coming from Jenny Holmes, and she's asked if mental health is covered in disability and in the Royal Commission.
Yeah, so mental disability is included in the Royal Commission, psychosocial and cognitive disability. And as people might be aware, we did a health hearing, a public health hearing, and the focus was on cognitive disability. So psychosocial disability is also very much under our terms of reference.
Yeah, great. A question from Linda Edwards. She's asked how financial services engage with and assist people in financial hardship or at risk of financial hardship.
So what was that question again, Troy?
I think she's just asking if, do you know of any ways that financial services have engaged with people with disability experiencing financial hardship?
So you're talking about within the community sector or within the financial sector?
The question reads, I'm wondering if there are any issues in terms of financial hardship that people with disabilities have faced or are facing. In particular, how financial services engage with and assist people in financial hardship or at risk of financial hardship.
Yeah, the issue of income and financial support is really critical for people with disabilities and carers and those who provide the support. I could imagine that people experiencing financial hardship as a result of disability because of not having access to financial support would be a concern, and obviously it could be framed as an area of neglect. So I would say for those who have concerns about that to contact the Disability Royal Commission helpline and to perhaps talk through that. And I'll give that helpline number now. So people can contact the Disability Royal Commission on 1800 517 911, or they can send their inquiries to drcinquiries@royalcommission.gov.au.
Thanks, Andrea. One last question from Anna Mumford. She's asking, so she commented, you made reference to the problem that many people do not understand the terms used, such as abuse, neglect, etc. Could you please provide a clear language statement on the site with an explanation of what these terms mean?
Yeah, so we, at the beginning of the Royal Commission, we did quite a bit of work in providing easy read guides for our I say corporate documents, so the terms of reference, the definitions. I also wanted to let people know that as I've travelled around to different communities and particularly in Queensland, such as Toowoomba, Cherbourg, Palm Island, it struck me that the words which join together to make up the definition of violence, abuse, neglect and exploitation may not be familiar words or words that First Nations people might use every day. It may not be words that people are very familiar with. So the Royal Commission is working at the moment of looking at a way of explaining those definitions which we've already created as easy to read guides, but for First Nations people specifically. So our comms people are looking at that now, and we'll go through a process of review, but hopefully we'll be able to get that out. I'd love that to be sent out in all forums, in all types of ways, either by video or through paper or using Auslan, because at the heart of what we're doing are those definitions, and really keen for people to understand how those definitions are understood, but also how they apply to people's different life circumstances. Because we have a very broad range of Royal Commission. It's looking at really the full life experience and life course of people with disabilities, including people from First Nations communities. So let's watch out for that, and hopefully we can come back perhaps through another Zoom webinar to talk about these definitions as we have crafted them for First Nations people.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that, Andrea.
Thank you.
Yeah, great work there. I've just got a message from Diana Palmer, guys, from Ideas. She's having some tech issues logging on. I'm trying to help her rectify that. So I was checking if there's any more questions, Andrea, before I continue.
Sure.
Oh yeah, there is one more question from Mark James Munich asking, he says, good afternoon, Commissioner. Following on from your first question, does mental health also extend to intergenerational trauma?
That's a really good question. And trauma and intergenerational trauma is an area of work which is becoming very well understood in the Australian community, but particularly in the First Nations community. And I would say that we couldn't look at violence, abuse, neglect and exploitation of First Nations people with disability without understanding intergenerational trauma. So, and of course, here in Australia, we have a very short history of European contact and all of that has happened as a consequence. But we also have, in different parts of Australia, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people where it is still a living memory of the trauma in later years. But we're also continuing to see trauma as a result of systems such as the child protection system, out of home care and so forth, and the justice system. So yes, I would say that it is a consideration.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'm still trying to work with Diana. So there's another question, Andrea. Will the Commission be engaging more with advocacy orgs funded to support people with submissions?
So was that a question about engaging with advocacy organisations?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The Commission wants to continue engaging with members of the disability sector as well, and particularly with advocacy organisations. Of course, the establishment of the Royal Commission came from advocacy organisations in the disability sector really advocating for it, as well as other allies. So, and we'll be making, I guess, the structure of that, the way that we'll be working with and communicating and talking with the disability advocacy groups, that we'll continue to explain that, I guess, in coming weeks. So we have for example, we have a First Nations people strategic advisory group, which I co-chair. And so we're also looking at another avenue of engaging with broader groups within the community. We have, obviously we have two commissioners who have a disability, Ewan Alistair McEwen and Rhonda Galbally, and they're providing some real, very strong leadership in the Royal Commission. And also we have a number of senior staff with disability, and they particularly are providing strong leadership. But we also acknowledge that we need to maintain good connection and communication with disability advocates. So we'll continue to talk about how that will be structured, I guess, not too long down the track.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Andrea. I think that's the last question for the Disability Royal Commission. I'm still having technical difficulties with Diana Palmer, and while I try and work on that in the background, perhaps we could, Antoinette, if you're there, maybe you'd like to share, and then we can get Diana on when she comes on board. That's okay.
Sure. How are you? Can you hear me? Because I'm having a few tech issues myself. So, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thanks.
Okay. Well, isn't this an interesting world right now? Can I firstly begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land which I'm standing on, the Wadawurrung people of in Victoria, and also to acknowledge the traditional owners of all of the lands of everyone around the country in this webinar. This is my very first webinar, so it's actually unfamiliar territory for me. I want to take this opportunity just to acknowledge the work of the First Peoples Disability Network, and of also Commissioner Andrea Mason, and thank you for your contribution, especially in the family violence space and for Aboriginal women as well, and the contribution that you're making in this space too is just fantastic. I understand that many of our organisations from across Australia, the Family Violence Prevention and Legal Services, have participated in consultations on the Royal Commission. So I'll take this opportunity just to acknowledge the intersecting issues when it comes to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who experience family violence and those who have a disability. What I'm going to talk about today is more about our people's experience of violence and how COVID-19 has exacerbated the situation. But also what we need to acknowledge is that before COVID-19, violence against Aboriginal women was happening at epidemic levels anyway. Once we come out of COVID-19, we are expecting that things will be much worse for our women. And also just to say that I wear two hats. Firstly, I'm the CEO of Djirra in Victoria, and I also wear the hat of the elected chairperson of the National Family Violence Prevention and Legal Services Forum, of which there are 13 members across the country, and we all work exclusively with victims, survivors of family violence and sexual assault. And while our services are not gender exclusive, more than 90% of our clients nationally are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women and their children. And I probably should have said at the start that I am an Aboriginal woman, and I was born in Victoria on Wurundjeri country, but my grandfather and mother's line is through Kuku Yalanji in far north Queensland. The perspective that I'm just going to give today is more of a Victorian one. I can touch a bit on the national perspective, but more of a focus on what my organisation in Victoria is seeing and does. But let me just start firstly by telling you that we have 7 offices around the state of Victoria, and we have all of our staff, more than 60 staff across Victoria, all working from home at the moment and have been for the last 6 months. That's been a massive task in itself to facilitate. And in Victoria, with our work being focused on victims, survivors of family violence, 98% of our clients are Aboriginal women and children. And the type of services that we provide are legal advice and representation, support and counselling. And there's 4 key areas of law that we cut across, and that's child protection, because we know that family violence is the primary driver to the removal of Aboriginal children, and also intervention orders and family law and victims of crime. And all of our services nationally work across those 4 areas of law too. we all, my organisation in Victoria, but all of the members develop and deliver early intervention prevention programs. And some of you might have heard of our really successful ones in Victoria, Sisters Day Out, Dilly Bag and Young Love. These programs for our organisation in Victoria have been critical to building trust and confidence and keeping us visible in communities, and providing an opportunity for us to take our service to the women, because we know that you know, it's difficult for any person who's experienced family violence just to take that first step and walk through the door and seek help. So what those programs have done is taken us to communities. With COVID-19, we haven't been able to deliver those programs in our communities. That's one area of concern for us, because that creates then an invisibility for us as an organisation. You know, often we talk about how Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women's are invisible and are often silenced. So now we've got an issue where our organisations are, in a sense, becoming invisible because we're not able to get out to our communities. So for us, that's the challenge, to find ways that we can stay visible, stay in contact and stay accessible to people in our communities who most need us. Much of our work, as I said earlier, is by phone. And so what we're doing is we're reaching out to all of our existing clients on a regular basis, keeping in contact with them by phone. And we're also reaching out to all of the women, all of the Aboriginal women in Victoria who have participated in our early intervention prevention programs, just to check in with them, just to see how they're going. And they're being, you know, very appreciative of the call. You know, we're hearing stories of how they're feeling during this time of isolation, the fear that they're feeling. Those programs, you know, that we have, like, just to give you an example of the reach that we have through those programs, our Sisters Day Out program alone in Victoria since inception about 10 or 12 years ago has reached out to over 11,000 Aboriginal women in Victoria. So they've been our key to community, and now we're having to look at different ways. Some of the challenges that we've found is that by phone contact is that many of our women don't have a mobile phone that they can call us back on. They don't have data, they don't have credit. So we've, you know, been trying to work out ways to get that credit and data to women. Our lawyers talked about, not just our lawyers, but our support staff were talking about how usually they can see women and they can see that they might be hurt in some way. They can see that there's something just not quite right in their eyes, but now they can't. And I said, look, you know, why don't we just FaceTime instead of calling? And the issue was that women don't have data. So we're trying to get credit out to women so that they have data, so we can have that face-to-face contact. And like, you know, we know, you know, from other experiences around the world that during times of pandemic, the risk of family violence is heightened. But, you know, at the same time, our organisations are also preparing for the end of the pandemic, when there will be an explosion for our services. And just on that, you know, we haven't seen a massive spike in our calls coming in, or women reaching out to us in other ways, which is a concern, because that means that there's an accessibility issue. But we know that at the end of this, we will see that demand explode. So where we are at the moment, not just in Victoria, but I guess nationally, is the isolation, and stay home kind of restrictions. So we're concerned that our limited access, there's limited access during business hours for women or people who most need us, between 9 and 5 o'clock. And we're also conscious that that at that time, the perpetrator might be in the home, kids might be around, so women can't make the call just to, reach out for help or just to have a yarn. So we're looking at ways that we can repurpose some of our funding or get additional funding to be able to offer outside of business hours services through phone and through other means like social media or apps or anything like that. What we know is that we need to have Aboriginal women on the other end of the phone, and because many people who are reaching out to us now, or we're reaching out to, really value the cultural support that we're providing. The outside of business hours support would allow us to be able to provide that cultural support. It would enable us to be able to make warm referrals to other services that do offer the more intense 24-hour service. We could do 3-way calls, that's a warm referral. And we could also have a counsellor on the other end of the phone. And we've seen an increase in requests for our counselling too, which is really interesting. There's, across the board, there's a lack of housing options available. So women can't just escape from their home because there's really nowhere to go. They can't go to family and there's no other houses available. They don't have money for a motel, but we can pay for motels for women to escape to. It's not the ideal, but we have. And clearly, these restrictions are putting women and children's lives at risk. There's essentially nowhere for our women to escape. And the other ways that we're looking at outside of business hours, and is what other opportunities there are to tap into, there's supermarkets where we might be able to have some kind of, some cards available or something. There's pharmacies. We also know that, people can still go to health professionals, so there's opportunity there as well. Every minute there's a new issue coming our way, and we're just trying to stay on top of those. And we're trying to be responsive to the unknown, essentially. There's many big calls that we're making within government. One big area for us is child protection, and how isolation, stay at home, puts children at risk of notifications being made. That's because, mums can't escape the violence. So notifications can be made on children. So once again, we will be seeing mums being blamed for the violence that they're experiencing, and for you know, keeping their kids in those violent situations. But there's no other options. We are seeing women who also have children who are subject to child protection orders, and in order to be able to have access to their children, they must meet certain conditions, like they must do urine testing and or attend a residential rehabilitation drug and alcohol service, and so the restrictions mean that women can't really comply with those conditions that are being imposed. One of our clients had to drive around to 3 pathology centres just to get a urine sample. All of them were closed except for the third one, and she drove several kilometres to be able to find one that was open, just to get a urine sample to be able to see her children. With respect to disability, we had one client communicate with us through Facebook Messenger because she had a hearing impairment, and we weren't able to have a conversation with her on the phone, and also the COVID hotline at the time, and I'm not sure if this has been changed, just wasn't set up to support people who had a hearing impairment. We have, with my national hat on, we have heard back from some of our members nationally that many of the mob in their community have just gone bush because they're scared and their families are scared. Some have asked for their violence restraining orders to be cancelled because, this is a time that family need to stick together, but not understanding that their violence restraining order could be varied rather than cancelled. Varied to just, to say that, the perpetrator can't threaten, harass or assault, but you can still live under the same house, under the same roof, or under the same tree, or in the same tent. And some of our member organisations have also told us that many people in their communities think that this is just a white person's disease and that it won't get us. As I said, every minute of the day, every one of us are trying to be so responsive to really diverse and unexpected and challenging issues. And at the same time, we're all trying to manage massive organisational change and adapt our services accordingly. But the biggest thing for my organisation in Victoria is to make sure that we remain visible and we remain accessible to women in our community. In Victoria pre-COVID, just to give you some of the statistics, Aboriginal women were 45 times more likely to experience family violence than other women, and 25 times more likely to be killed or injured as a result of violence. And I know these numbers are greater and in other states and territories as well, but this is just to give you, an understanding of what we're talking about pre-COVID. And these numbers are going to increase significantly post-COVID. On a national front, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women are 32 times more likely to be hospitalised as a result of violence, and we're 10 times more likely to die from a violent assault. So that's the national picture. It's going to keep going up and up and up. As I said at the start, family violence is a primary driver to the removal of Aboriginal children. isolation and all of these restrictions will mean that we will see an increase in our children more of our children landing in out-of-home care. So we're making some big calls in Victoria and also in other states and territories around changes to child protection legislation so that Aboriginal families and Aboriginal mums who are experiencing family violence, their rights are protected when it comes to their children. On the incarceration front, we know that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women are the fastest growing prison population in the country. We know that many of our women, many of our people, in fact, sit on remand for very long periods of time and often don't receive a custodial sentence. And this is a perfect time now for all of our governments, state and territory governments, to release Aboriginal people or anyone from prison who shouldn't be there, or people shouldn't be there, full stop. But our call goes straight to calling on our Victorian government to release Aboriginal women who are on remand and on remand for non-violent offences. That's an easy ask and that's so doable. And we have weekly meetings with the Minister for Corrections. They've assured us that there's no current cases of COVID in the Victorian prisons, but we're always asking the question, well, how much testing's been done? And, always keeping them accountable to the safety of our women.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry to cut you off there, Antoinette. I'm just conscious of time.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. It's a lot of great work that you guys are actually doing there, and just wanted to acknowledge that. But there are a few questions coming through as well, so I thought we might just get to those. And also just wanted to let everybody know that Diana Palmer from Ideas was not able to log on due to issues with her tech side of things. So we might just go through these questions, Antoinette, if that's okay.
Sure.
So, hang on a sec. So we've got Bruce Simpson. His comment is, it sounds like an awesome service, well done. He doesn't condone DV, however, not all men are perpetrators. My question is, are there any programs for the men that you may know of who may be or are experiencing DV either in your state or nationally?
So the comment was that not all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander men are perpetrators. And are there any services for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander men that I know of? Is that? Yeah,
that might be experiencing DV as a man.
Look, can I just say straight up that usually when I do longer presentations, I always talk about how when we talk about violence against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women being a national emergency, that's not about us pointing the finger at Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander men as being the perpetrators of violence. In fact, if you look at research, external research in let's just say Victoria, in Melbourne alone, 85% of Aboriginal women are partnered with non-Indigenous men. And our data internally shows us also that a vast majority of Aboriginal women that we work with are partnered with men from many different cultures and backgrounds. Violence against women is not an Aboriginal problem. We're not violent people, so I just want to say that up front. In respect of do I know of any services available for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander men? In Victoria, yes, I do, and we have a very close relationship with Dadi Manwara that works with Aboriginal men who use violence against women, and all women, not just Aboriginal women, but it's about men's violence against women. And I can in some way feed back some information about other men's services from our national members, if that would be helpful. But that's my understanding of the services in Melbourne.
Yeah, thank you for that, Antoinette. Just going on in the chat, I just wanted to acknowledge that there has been a couple of comments around making this accessible to our deaf mob. Obviously, we understand the importance of that. This is only our second run at this webinar platform. So we just want to acknowledge that, and also, you know, thank everybody for their patience with this. We're still getting it set up, and we're looking into closed captioning and also transcripts once we make this recording available on our website. So thank you very much for everybody with those comments. Bruce Simpson also just wanted to put out there that there is a group of people that do advocate for men experiencing domestic violence. They are called the Australian Brotherhood of Fathers, and they're on Facebook and other social media platforms. We've probably got time for another few questions, so I'll just go through the comments and look at what else is being asked. Another one for you, Antoinette. This is from David. He's said, you mentioned that Aboriginal women who need to do drug testing to see their children, have the family courts or federal circuit courts accepted this as an excuse for not providing urine samples? For example, there are no urine testing centres available because of COVID.
So that's one of the systemic issues that we're trying to push through the courts at the moment, but we haven't had any changes in respect of that at the moment.
Okay, thanks. A question from Linda Edwards. Are there any services for perpetrators to limit or stop the violence?
As I said before, in Victoria, there's Dadi Manwara, and I can provide a list from our national members. Can I just be very clear? As an Aboriginal woman, I am a strong advocate for services for Aboriginal women who experience family violence, and services that are culturally safe and Aboriginal community controlled. In the same way that I am a strong advocate for culturally safe Aboriginal community controlled services for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander men who use violence against women.
Yeah, thanks. Another one from Linda Edwards. She's asked, in matters that your organisation sees, is there a link between family and domestic violence and financial abuse?
There absolutely is, and we see this all of the time in our work, and so much so that many of our programs are designed to improve financial literacy. And we're doing some online stuff at the moment with financial literacy. Many of our women do incur debts as a result of family violence. The perpetrator often gets them to put them in their name. So often end up with massive, fines from cars and that kind of stuff. Look, financial abuse is family violence. It's about controlling behaviour.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Antoinette. Do you link in with other, I think you probably touched on that, like your service linking with financial counsellors and financial capability workers? That's also from Linda Edwards.
Yeah, my organisation in Victoria does certainly do that. One thing that I do want to say with my national hat on is that there needs to be more of an investment and a prioritisation of funding from the federal government to our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander family violence prevention and legal services. It's unacceptable when we see announcements of funding, not just during this pandemic, but any other time, but there's no direct allocation of funding straight through to services that are for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women's safety.
Yeah, just one last question, and I think we'll wrap it up here after this last question. Thanks, Antoinette. And the question is, how many, I guess, victims would your service sort of encounter that have a disability?
This is one question that we're not asking on one issue that we're not identifying at the moment, but we know that it is something that is really important. What I do know is that, and I don't, look, I'm not aware of the language around disability and all of that kind of stuff, but I do know that many women who come to us have mental health issues. I know that many do come with a brain injury. But it is something nationally, not just in Victoria, that we know that we need to get some more data on. But again, it's a capacity issue for us and resourcing issue.
Yeah, I think the resourcing issues are one for many services across the country, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, Antoinette and Andrea, I just want to take this opportunity to once again thank you for your time and in sharing your knowledge and experience with all of us here today. And as I said, there are obviously a few tech issues that we've encountered today that we're going to endeavour to work on for the next series. Next week, we're going to have around engaging Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in remote communities and how to do that remotely. And we're going to have Jeff McMullen and also a few other people come on board for that. So registrations will be sent around, and if you're interested, and obviously fill out the form, there's limited spaces and it's on a first in, first served basis. So thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your week. And
sorry,
yeah.
can I say one other thing? I'm really sorry, I couldn't work out how to do my camera, but I can see in some of the comments there, and I've got a couple of text messages, turn your camera on. It's not that I'm having a bad hair day.
No, that's fine. Yeah, I'm not sure what happened there either, Antoinette, but it's all good. And I think, you know, the main thing is that, you know, your sharing of information and experience in your sector around DV has been invaluable for everybody. So we're going to endeavour to also, you know, put a transcript up as well. So, you know, I think we'll end the meeting here, guys. Thank you, everybody. And yeah, have a great week.
Thank you.